Watch the nightly news and you see cities burning, economies fracturing, and a culture engaged in constant, violent conflict. Yet, look at the general public, and you see millions of people staring blankly into glowing screens, completely numb to the chaos around them. It presents a fascinating geopolitical riddle. How exactly do you conquer a nation and strip away its wealth without ever firing a weapon? This mass apathy is the calculated result of civilian brainwashing, developed behind the closed doors of a secretive research center in London. Welcome back to the Bookish Breakdown. Today, we are dissecting the invisible forces shaping our world by looking closely at the Tavistock Institute of Human Relations, widely recognized by researchers as the world's premier psychological warfare center. Former intelligence officer Dr. John Coleman details a thesis where a global ruling elite utilizes Tavistock psychological tactics to maintain control. By engineering mass trauma, they lead massive populations to willingly surrender their own wealth and freedoms without organizing a resistance. Unpacking the exact science behind these operations requires looking at modern history through an entirely different lens. It challenges the comforting illusion that cultural shifts happen organically. Daily societal chaos serves as a perfectly calibrated system designed to hack the human mind, operating with a precision that defies random political accident. To see how this system operates, we have to look at its origins. The Institute began in 1914 at Wellington House in London. Its original mission was straightforward: build a massive propaganda machine capable of persuading a reluctant British public to march into World War I. By World War II, the social scientists at Tavistock had escalated their methods. Under the guidance of Dr. Lewin, they developed a military initiative known as the Strategic Bombing Survey. This survey was a calculated experiment in mass trauma. Rather than hitting strategic military targets, Allied bombers were directed to deliberately target and destroy German civilian worker housing. The goal was to completely break the psychological morale of the population. Following the war, the architects of these terror techniques looked inward. They adapted these exact psychological weapons and aimed them directly at the peacetime civilian population of the United States. The primary weapon deployed in this domestic war is a social engineering concept developed by these researchers. They call it the future shock. A future shock is a continuous series of rapid crises engineered to overload decision-making faculties. Like an electrical circuit, when overloaded, a trip switch activates to shut the system down. Under continuous shocks, the brain is forced to trip out and shut down critical thinking. By applying this wartime attrition to modern media, social engineers ensure the civilian trip switch remains activated. This turns chronic societal stress into a weaponized state of permanent intellectual shutdown. Tavistock's research mapped out exactly what happens when a population is subjected to continuous future shocks. They discovered that society fractures in 3 predictable clinical phases. Phase 1 is superficiality. A panicked public defends itself with empty slogans and surface-level arguments, completely failing to identify the true source of the crises.
As the shocks continue, Phase 2 kicks in: fragmentation. Social order frays, individuals isolate themselves, and society splinters into hostile factions. Dr. Coleman points to the 1960s youth counterculture as undeniable historical proof of this system in action. According to his research, the sudden explosion of youth rebellion was carefully orchestrated by Tavistock and its American affiliates, like the Stanford Research Institute, to induce this exact fragmentation. Dr. Coleman posits that groups like the Beatles were a carefully managed phenomenon. Tavistock specialist Theo Adorno composed highly repetitive 12-atonal music for these groups, a style that avoids traditional harmonic resolutions. By denying the ear a sense of musical rest, the music was designed to produce mental fatigue and keep the listener in a state of emotional agitation. Hand in hand with the music came linguistic warfare. Social scientists literally coined artificial trigger words for the public to use, like teenager, pop music, and cool, intentionally driving a wedge between parents and children to isolate the youth. Once the population is fragmented and exhausted, they enter the final stage:
complete psychological breakdown. The public lapses into deep apathy and blindly accepts whatever loss of freedom is forced upon them. To lock in this final phase of apathy, elite-linked pharmaceutical companies manufactured LSD, a potent synthetic hallucinogen. Philosophers like Aldous Huxley were deployed by these organizations to distribute the drug freely in sample packages on college campuses, chemically sealing the breakdown. The rebellious music and widespread drug culture of the 1960s were marketed as movements of liberation. In reality, they were the ultimate delivery systems for mass psychological pacification. While polluting the culture with drugs and media generates staggering profits, the deeper strategy focuses on total societal pacification. Dr. Coleman draws a direct comparison to the 19th century Opium Wars. During that conflict, the British East India Company deliberately addicted millions of Chinese laborers to opium to keep the population physically subdued and easily controlled. The deployment of rock music and LSD in the 1960s functioned exactly like 19th century opium. It numbed the minds of American youth, heavily distracting them from the political and economic destruction occurring within their own country. Aldous Huxley himself admitted the power of this strategy. He noted that by making chemical euphoria freely available, a dictator could reconcile an entire population to a state of affairs that self-respecting human beings should naturally reject. The invisible government does not require outright military force to rule. They maintain their structure through media saturation, manufactured crises, and the creation of a purposeless, apathetic mass entirely incapable of resistance. Shadow organizations rely entirely on a lack of public awareness to operate. Identifying the true source of these manufactured crises begins to dissolve their influence. Reclaiming your own cognitive sovereignty starts with understanding the hidden handlers pulling the strings. If this deep dive changed your perspective on the nightly news, hit that like button and subscribe to the Bookish Breakdown. Stay curious, keep reading, and I'll see you in the next breakdown.